Apostles of the End Times Church. Now, if you've watched my other videos on related topics, you'll see my perspective that there has been a great sidelining of the necessary gifts and callings of apostles throughout the mainstream denominational dispensational church. That is going to change as so many elements of mainstream denominational dispensational church disappear from the landscape. And you have a quote-unquote above ground state church and a quote-unquote underground faithful church, which become these isolated islands of groups of believers, probably Essers, meeting as quietly as possible. Now, we will see a resurgence in the church's acknowledgement of the necessity of apostles. I'm not sure the terminology will return. I hope to God that it will, because it's God's term and it's God's word, and it clarifies communication and understanding of things like people's gifts and callings. It doesn't help anything that every single licensed leader of every church is called a pastor. It doesn't help anybody understand that person's unique contribution and God-given design to that group of God's people. It muddies water. Okay. Like putting ketchup on breakfast, lunch, and dinner, per se. We will see some changes occurring. It will take a great deal of faith and bravery for average believer to even be a participant in an Esser. The temptation will be to go as silent as possible. And they will crave connection and relationship with the rest of the church, but how are they going to have it? I believe Christian radio will be gone. Christian television will be gone unless it's controlled by government and or state church. Your ability to even know what's going on with an Esser across town. People that maybe a few years before you saw every single Sunday until that collapsed. Who is going to be brave enough to want to connect those two things? It could be anyone God calls to do it, but I believe it's going to be one aspect of the apostolic ministries of the end times church. Very similar to Paul connecting churches throughout Asia Minor. This person will arrive, equip these churches, give them the prayer requests and needs of other churches they're connected with, and perhaps distribute the way that Paul did financially, or the food resources that need to be distributed throughout God's people. There's a third element that I think is far more difficult. We associate apostles with church planting, and that's partially true, partially a generalization, because if we look at Paul's church planting strategy, he was there often 15 days at a time and entrusted leadership to elders. And so unless you consider his church planting to happen remotely, a great deal of the work and leadership happening while that was going from a seed to a plant was elders who were overseen by and connected to Paul. Elders were the ones really leading through that church planting phase. Okay. Also, I believe in one church with many expressions of it. So, I mean, it's a funny thing even to call a church, because there's one church. But I can think of very few things as dangerous as the attempt to create new expressions of God's people, new churches in the end times. That is, that Esther is dangerous enough to begin with, and is full of people that are trying to keep their faith quiet. Someone who wants to connect believers that aren't yet connected, every single one of them a potential Judas that could have you thrown in jail. It's difficult to say, but if churches are planted in that underground Esser sense, house church sense, in the end times, it will be one of the most perilous, dangerous things believers have ever undertaken. If I have blessed you, encouraged you, or equipped you in any fashion, please like and subscribe. Thank you.